coming. So this is, oh, and Kate is recording, just to let you all know. This is part 2 of our school wellness policy training, and part 2 is all going to be about how to update and implement your district wellness policy. And I want to be upfront and say that we know that talking about how to update a policy is not the most exciting topic of conversation. So what would really help, I think, is if we run this a little bit more as a sort of led discussion instead of Kate and I presenting all the information and you sitting there and trying to take it all in. So I'm going to ask you to please speak up, share what's going on at your district. I think that will make this as useful for you as possible, because it will help you kind of see where in your policy you can make some updates that are going to be practical and make some changes, but without putting something in your policy that, you know, isn't realistic to implement. All right. So I just wanted to start off with reminding everyone of what we talked about in part 1 of the wellness policy training. And that was all about what the regulations are around wellness policies and how to assess a wellness policy. So first up, this is just going to be a couple slides on what we talked about last time, just in case anyone missed the last training or it's been a while and you've kind of forgotten. So what are the federal regulations? So first of all, every district has to have a wellness policy if you participate in the National School Lunch Program or school breakfast program. You have to have a wellness policy. It has to apply to all the schools in your district. And then why you have to have a wellness policy, and that is because it gives you a written document that really guides your district's efforts to create supportive school nutrition and physical activity environments. And it provides a common language for everyone in the district. When they're talking about wellness, you all sort of know the basics. It ensures that wellness becomes part of your school culture, and it makes sure that those wellness practices are really sustained over time, because as there's staff turnover or administration turnover, there's still the same policy in place. And then what has to be in that wellness policy? And we kind of went through the 6 elements that had to be in your wellness policy. And those were how you're going to make sure that you're having stakeholder participation, that you have nutrition guidelines, that you do nutrition education and promotion, that you include policy elements around physical education and activity, that you do the monitoring and evaluation of your wellness policy, and then that you notify everyone of what is in your policy and that your policy exists. So that's a little reminder from last time. Does anyone have any questions before I get into this about just general wellness policy, what has to be in it, or doing the evaluation? Okay, I will get right into the bulk of today's. So what we decided to do today is we're going to go through the WellSat and pull out the areas that we notice that districts often have a low score or have a hard time implementing what is in their policy. And we're going to give you some example policy language around that WellSat element, as well as talk about some of the implications of having that as your policy and how you would implement that part of the policy. And then I just want to point out that on any of the sort of topics from the WellSat that are federally required to be in your wellness policy, you're going to see that little like White House or Capitol building, I'm not even sure, that little symbol of a building is going to be on those ones. So you know that that's not an optional thing to have in your wellness policy. You need to have that. And so the WellSat has 6 sections: nutrition education, school meals, and nutrition standards. I'm going to talk about those 3. Then I'm going to turn it over to Kate, and she's going to go through PE and physical activity, wellness promotion, and implementation. And I just need to share in the chat. If you want to grab a copy of the WellSat scorecard so that you can refer to it, because we're going to be talking about like specific parts of the WellSat and specific questions in it. So if you want to see the entire question, you can pull up that WellSat scorecard and look at that. All right, so starting off with nutrition education. So questions NE3, 4, and 5 are all about having sequential and comprehensive nutrition education for students K through 12. So best practice says effective nutrition education focuses on behavior change and takes time. It's delivered in an adequate amount of time, and it takes 40 to 50 hours of education over the course of the year to change students' general knowledge on a subject and to impact what they do and their attitudes towards that subject. So finding 40 to 50 hours for nutrition education is kind of the best practice, ideal, what we would love for you to do. And if you're able to do that, putting into your policy language something like nutrition topics will be integrated within the comprehensive health education curriculum and taught at every grade level, K through 12. That would be wonderful language to include in your wellness policy. But that requires that health education is taught K through 12. So I just wanted to ask all of you, in your district, is health education taught in every grade?
I don't think it is in ours.
No, we don't.
Okay.
Especially at the elementary level.
Okay, so then I want to talk about a little bit about, you can't put in the policy that you're going to teach nutrition education as part of a comprehensive health education K through 12 if you don't have comprehensive health education K through 12. In New York State, you're required to do health education K through 5 or 4 or 6, depending on where the breakup is, but it has to be taught by the classroom teacher in elementary school, and then it has to be taught once in middle school and once in high school. But then kind of a separate thing, mental health has to be taught K through 12, and Aaron's Law has to be taught K through 8. So it gets a little bit complicated to figure out who is teaching what in terms of health education. Is nutrition education being taught in every grade as part of health education, separate from health education? So before you update your policy and put language in around teaching nutrition education, K through 12 or K through 5, you really want to do a health education audit and figure out who's teaching what. Are classroom teachers teaching health education? What are they teaching in health education? Is some of that nutrition? What's happening at middle school? What's happening at high school? Is there room to put in more health education classes? Or is sort of one in middle school and one in high school the most that you can do? And how much nutrition education is part of those curriculums? So that would be our big recommendation around that. All right, for NE6 is all about integrating nutrition education into other subjects. So if we're talking about trying to get that 40 to 50 hours of nutrition education in every year, you probably don't have 40 to 50 hours of specific health education classes every year. So one of the ways to get more nutrition education in is to integrate it into the broader curriculum. And the language we would recommend here is nutrition education will be integrated into the broader curriculum where appropriate. But then we really want it to be. We don't want you to say, oh, it's not appropriate anywhere. So we're going to put that in our policy, but not actually integrate it. But in order to do that, you need to provide training or at least resources for teachers to make sure that they know how to integrate nutrition education. And I just wanted to give a couple of examples that I found on this website, and you'll get these slides so you can check this out, integrating nutrition education into the school curriculum. So, you know, in math, if you are working on measurement, length, weight, volume, those are all things that could be sort of done with food, done in a school garden. So that would be just one super simple way of integrating nutrition education into math. And in terms of science, you know, there's quite a bit of science that includes stuff that could be considered nutrition education. So in like the lower grades, learning the parts of a plant, that's still part of nutrition education, especially if you talk about what parts of the plant you eat. And, you know, sometimes you eat the roots and sometimes you eat the leaves. So stuff like that. For NE 7 and 8 is really all about school gardens. So it's about the school food environment, agriculture, and the food system. And some of the language that's recommended for this would be the nutrition education program will work with the school meal program to develop school gardens and use the cafeteria as a learning lab. Alternatively, something like the nutrition education curriculum will use the school garden as a teaching tool. So the way to really ideally do this is to have students learning about growing food, harvesting food, and then having that food available for them in the cafeteria so that they are then eating the food that they've grown, and they see sort of how you go from agriculture to consuming. They learn that whole part of the system, and it encourages them obviously to eat healthy food that has been grown in the school garden. So we encourage you to have a school garden, whether that is a hydroponic tower garden or an outdoor sort of more conventional soil garden. That's great. And if you have one and you have had one for a few years and it's regularly used, that would be great language to include in your policy, because you don't want there to be sort of one teacher who has done everything with the school garden, and when they leave, retire, move on to a different district, school gardening doesn't happen anymore. So if it's a regular part of your school, figure out how you should include that in your policy so that it will happen for years to come. I would not recommend, if you don't currently have a school garden, putting language in your policy that says that you're going to start a school garden or have a school garden, because you just want to make sure that it's something that you're actually going to be able to sustain for the length of this policy, and that it's not going to be something that's in your policy and isn't actually done. And I know there are a couple districts that are buying some hydroponic tower gardens right now. And I think it would be great if this year you use the tower gardens, and then maybe in the future include something in your policy about making them a regular part of providing food to the cafeteria, because that is a whole kind of separate, a little bit complicated thing to get the food from the school garden into the cafeteria, and requires quite a bit of coordination with your food service director. All right, so that was what I wanted to talk about with nutrition education. And I want to take a few minutes if anybody has anything they would like to ask about any of those topics before we move on to school meals. I have a hard time.
Part of me is looking at the gardens and just the logistics of it all and the functionality of it and just executing it. It does seem like a good idea, and it will benefit those who are a part of it. It could be one of those things that's difficult to pull off and make it really work to the ideal that we want it to work to. I don't know if you have any input on schools that have been using them successfully.
So there are schools that use them very successfully, that really integrate them into like many components of the school. They harvest the food and have it in the cafeteria, and the kids are eating that food, and they know that, and it takes a huge amount of coordination. So I've seen examples of it being done really, really wonderfully in huge districts that have sort of a dedicated person that does that. And in smaller districts, I think it's going to take a bunch of people working together to make it work well. And it's probably going to take quite a bit of time. Like, I would not say that starting a school garden and having it be well integrated in all parts of the school is a short-term project. That is a really long-term project. So I would say you're best off starting small and having that be successful, like having one teacher who uses it for their science class or their nutrition class, and getting that working well before trying to like scale it up, because it can get overwhelming. Does anyone else have school gardens that they're using, not using? Yeah, Danae.
Well, we have a school garden, but it just seems that everything that grows in there matures when our kids are home for the summer. So they don't really take full advantage of it. And one of our ENL teachers, she started it, and she's very big with Earth Day and everything else, which is great. We have rain barrels, we have all that stuff, but it just seems like our students can't fully take advantage of it because it's not big. She's kind of by herself. And like I said, the maturity of what grows in there, no one's here to really enjoy it.
Yeah. So there are some like plants, obviously, that you can grow that are harvested either in the fall or in the spring before students leave. So one of the suggestions is to like plant more of those plants. And then also like having some indoor gardening obviously allows you to do it a little bit more year round. And we would love to work with your wellness committee to figure out like how to make that as effective as possible. So that's one of the areas that we can talk about at your next wellness committee meeting, is trying to make that more effective.
We can also set up a separate meeting for all the districts that are interested in school gardening and problem solve and share and create some action plans and some committees moving forward. Because like Sarah said, it does take a lot of work and coordination, but it is 100% possible if you've got the people who are willing to, overcome barriers and figure things out. Where there's a will, there's a way when it comes to school gardens, 100%.
Anybody else have anything before I start talking about what you should include in your policy around school meals? All right. So this part is school meals 3 and 4, the questions in the WellSat, are all about making sure that students who participate in the free and reduced meals, that information is kept private, and that there's no stigma attached to it, and nothing stigmatizing for students who might have an unpaid meal balance. And this is one of those areas that is a federal requirement in your wellness policy. So many of the schools that we work in participate in the community eligibility provision. So meaning everybody gets free meals. And if that's the case, you should put that in your policy, as long as you think that will be the case for at least the next few years. So language like the district will participate in the community eligibility provision to provide free school meals to all students without requiring individual applications is great. For districts that don't participate in the CEP, or that imagine that in the future they might not participate, you need to have language around student payment being non-stigmatizing, and around students getting meals even when they don't have money on their account. So the language there works. There's also, you might have a entirely separate policy on school meals and payment for school meals. And if that's the case, you need to link to it in your wellness policy. You don't need to repeat the whole thing, but you need to have a link to it so everybody can find that. All right, in terms of School Meal 6, which is all about increasing participation in your school meal program. And I like this part of the policy because this is really where you can give some specific examples of what your district does to encourage participation in school meals. So we would like school meals to be so wonderful that all students want to eat them every day and participate in the school meal program. And basically, how do you do that? How do you encourage students? And this is one of the places, even though many districts have very similar policies from the same like policy template, this is one of those places where you kind of need to individualize your policy around what you really do to encourage school meals. So does anyone have any examples of things that your district does that encourages students to buy the or to take the school meal?
Our school, go ahead, John.
Good. I was just going to say that we since we went to self-op and more scratch cooking, like you said, making the meals more appetizing, that's helped out a lot. We just realized now at the elementary school, our numbers jumped from, I mean, a lot of that has to do with COVID, but our participation has climbed quite a bit. We went from having about the beginning of last year, about 200 kids, 200 to 250, up to we're about 350 the last few weeks. So
that's great. And I know that one of the things that you do is you solicit feedback from students and families around what they like and don't like in the cafeteria. And that's one of the things that we really encourage you to do and to put in your policy, that you're going to ask students and parents for feedback around the school meals. And I just wanted to give this as an example that we kind of love, and that is providing periodic food promotions and encouraging taste testing of new foods before they're introduced on the menu, so that you ask students, do you like this, before you add it to the menu, is a great way of encouraging people to participate in the school meals. And if that's something you do, you should put that in your policy, because it's a wonderful thing and we want it to continue. Did anyone else want to share something that your district does to encourage students to make use of school meals?
I was going to share, actually, we were just talking last week with our culinary team, and they did already say they had introduced something kind of new to the students, and it wasn't really popular. So they had already discussed, gosh, next time we put on a new menu item, we're going to set it out, we're going to give a taste test the week before in little cups or whatnot, so they get exposed to it, before it comes out on the line. And they also have done surveys before, and they're going to do surveys again, ask the kids what they like, what they don't like. And then I think it was 2 years ago, but I think they've been doing it consistently. They would do a contest where the students could design the menu. And
I remember when they did that.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that they're going to bring that back again too. That was a really great thing.
Thank you. Yeah, those are great. All right. Moving on to SM7, and I don't have a huge amount to say about this, and it's about how long students have to eat their meals. So the best practice is at least 10 minutes for breakfast and at least 20 minutes for lunch. And that's not the time that they're in the cafeteria, but the time that they're actually sitting down. So in order to get them 10 minutes at breakfast and 20 minutes at lunch, you might need to look at how long they're waiting in line at the cafeteria, just to make sure that you are meeting those minute. They're not requirements, but we really recommend that you put in your policy that they will have that, and that you figure out how much time they are currently getting to sit and eat, and make sure that it's at least that. All right, for SM10 is all about having local foods in the school meal program. So some language around that could be school meals will include fresh, locally grown foods from farms engaged in sustainable practices whenever possible, and these foods will be promoted in the cafeteria. And promoting them in the cafeteria could be as simple as what's at the bottom of this slide is putting it on the menu. So saying like it's a farm to school featured item of roasted cauliflower, when it's going to be available, and then maybe putting up a little sign in the cafeteria to tell students that like that's the promoted locally grown produce of that day. So if you already do that, put it in your policy, and if you don't already do that, maybe consider doing that so that you can then include it in your policy. All right, I'm going to move on to nutrition standards in the WellSat. So NS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all about Smart Snacks guidelines. And this is required that you have this in your policy. So we're not really telling you what to put in your policy because you have to have it in there that all the food that you're selling to students during the school day meets those guidelines. But you want your policy to be really clear to everyone, not just to people that are really familiar with what Smart Snacks guidelines are. You want to have a link to the guidelines so that people can go see. You want it to be clear to parents if they're reading that wellness policy, what it actually means. And then maybe you want to go beyond those standards and have some stricter standards for your district. And if that's the case, you've got to figure out what you want those standards to be, and then put it in your policy. But at a minimum, you have to have the Smart Snacks standards in your policy, and you have to follow it. And sometimes where we see trouble is with the actually making sure that that policy is implemented. So it's always, followed in the cafeteria pretty much, but then there's other places around the school where students can buy food in vending machines or in school stores, or maybe a teacher is selling candy bars to raise money for a sports team, and they can't do that. Though all of the food that's sold to students during the school day has to meet those Smart Snacks guidelines. So it can't be candy bars or full sugar pop. So does anyone know if they follow all of that policy? Or if they even maybe have a policy that's a little bit stricter than the required federal one?
Yeah, I think we are.
Excellent. All right, so NS8 is all about caffeine. So no caffeine can be served to elementary or middle school students, but in high school, they're allowed to buy caffeinated beverages. Best practice would be not to sell any caffeinated beverages on the high school campus, and that's what we would really recommend. But there are schools that want to be able to sell some caffeinated beverages. And if that's the case, you might want to set a maximum caffeine limit so that you're not allowing the sale of energy drinks. Or you might want to specify that, things like taurine or L-carnitine aren't allowed in beverages that are sold to students, because we would really want to discourage energy drinks from students, and also not healthy to be selling huge cups of super caffeinated coffee to students. So there's a link here to sort of the CDC's recommendations around energy drinks and caffeine. And I would encourage you to look at that and think about what you can put in your policy that, is practical, that will actually be done in your district, but to make it sort of as strong as you possibly can. Do any of you not allow any caffeine to be sold? All right, I'm gonna guess that most of the high schools then have some caffeine sold to students. And I know that at one of the schools we're working in, they were saying they noticed that in the vending machines there were energy drinks, and that's something they want to work on. So I'd take a look, check what's in your vending machines, and make sure that it meets the current federal regulations, but then look at what you could do to strengthen the regulations in your policy. All right. NS9 is all about school celebrations and classroom celebrations in elementary schools. And it is federally required that you have some sort of policy, and that you have that that you have a policy and it's in your wellness policy, and you have guidelines. It's not required what those guidelines are, but what we would recommend as best practice is that classroom celebrations will focus on activities rather than food. No food will be served. But again, this is one of those places where you have to put in the strongest language that you can implement. So you don't want to put in language and then not follow that policy at all. And this is a place, there's a bunch of these where you can put in an implementation timeline. So you can say, for the first 2 years of this wellness policy, we are going to encourage non-food classroom celebrations. In 2 years, we are going to require that classroom celebrations don't include food. So that way you give time to sort of get everyone on board with the new policy. And you give time for the education component, and you give time to let teachers know what they can do as alternatives, and to put something in place so that it's actually, your policy can be followed once it is, officially the policy. And before that, it can be a recommendation, or you can put in that you're going to train all the teachers to have healthier celebrations, and then in a year or 2 years, you're going to require that they do. So this is an example of, a non-food celebration, a party cart that you could do. So we've got a few schools that are implementing this in their district, where, this cart can be moved around to different classrooms. So on a child's birthday, the party cart comes and they get to choose what they're doing out of the party cart instead of bringing in cupcakes or something. And then this is just some other possible language that you could use. Food cannot be served as part of classroom celebrations before school lunch. So you're not going to you're promising not to give kids cupcakes and then send them to the cafeteria for lunch, and nobody eats the lunch because they filled up on cupcakes. Or you're going to limit the food items to those that meet Smart Snack guidelines. So parents can't send in cupcakes, but they could send in something that meets the guidelines. And I was kind of curious, we are getting a little bit short on time, but if anyone had anything they wanted to share about what you do at your school around classroom celebrations. No volunteers?
I don't know. It seems like we got a lot of food going on when we're celebrating things, which is good in some ways, right? You want to have a birthday celebration. I don't know. I might be a little biased on that, but sometimes we have, I feel like the elementary into the middle, our Seneca Intermediate has some birthday stuff going on for sure.
And what we want is there to be birthday celebrations. We want them to be birthday celebrations that everybody can participate in, because what we know is that sometimes food celebrations leave kids out. They leave out the kids that have allergies. They might leave out the kids whose parents, for financial or other reasons, can't provide the cupcakes. So what we really want is birthday celebrations that are fun for all kids and that they celebrate the student more so than just bringing in some sugar. But we have a whole presentation on that, and we can talk about that for, hours. So I'm just going to say that you have to put something in your policy around what you're doing at school celebrations. And if what you're doing is we allow anyone to eat anything, you have to write that in your policy. And you might not want to write that in your policy. So you might want to come up with some limit, whatever that is, and put that in the policy. I'm going to go through this part pretty quick because I'm running into Kate's part of the presentation. So NS10 is all about food served to students after school. And so that's served to students, not necessarily sold to students. But what you want to think about is not just like aftercare, because they usually have guidelines. But when you bring in community groups for some sort of after school event, you can tell them that they can't serve the kids candy in order to encourage them to come over to their table. You can tell them that they have to either make that food healthy or not give food to students. Because what we don't want is to tell students that they should eat healthy food and then encourage them to come check out the table all about, I don't know, whatever, by giving them a piece of candy or a lollipop if they come over to that table during a community kind of after school event. All right, and then food sold to students after school. So this is your vending machines, your school store, your concession stands. And some of the language we recommend is that all the food sold, even after school, meets the USDA Smart Snack Nutrition Standards. And we know that that is probably not the language that's currently in your policy. But what we have seen is some districts have that 50% of the items sold at events will meet the Smart Snack standards. And that might be a good place to start. Or this is another area where you can kind of put in an implementation timeline where, for the first 2 years, 50% of the items sold will meet those guidelines, and following that 75%. And you're not saying that you'll never sell chips at a football game, but that you're going to make sure that there are at least a bunch of other healthy alternatives and not just unhealthy things at in those concession stands. So this was just an example of a football game where they were hosting a soup night where they'd made, 20 different varieties of soup. And that was, they're still selling concessions, they're still making money, but soups are not always incredibly healthy, but generally are healthier than a lot of alternatives that are sold in concession stands. So I just wanted to point that out. NS12 is about not using food as a reward. So the policy language that we would recommend is the use of food or candy as a classroom reward in any school is prohibited, except when used as part of an established IEP. So, giving kids a candy bar for doing their homework or getting 100% on a test doesn't send a great message. And this is another area where it might take sort of a school-wide reward system being set up to encourage individual teachers not to go sort of this easy, not very expensive route of having a bowl full of candy that they hand out to students to say good job for doing whatever it is that they did. So before putting it in your policy that you're prohibiting it, make sure that you're giving teachers an alternative for rewarding students, and that alternative doesn't require them to set up an entire system for their classroom that's going to take time and money that they might not have. And I think this is my last one, and that is about having free water available. So you want to say that students will have access to free water. Students are allowed to bring water bottles to class. Whatever it is that you do to make sure that students have access to water, put that in your policy so that it will continue and you won't have one teacher that says, nope, you can't go get a water break, and no, you can't bring water bottles to class. And if it's in your policy, then you can make sure that it's carried out. And I am going to now turn this over to Kate.
All right. Haven't already, if you can put your name and school district in the chat, just as our sign-in sheet. Okay, so we are going to then now be talking about physical activity and physical education. So in the WellSat, because it's a federal tool, it is asking you if you meet the federal regulations. I don't know of any district in New York State that meets the federal regulations. I know most districts are even struggling to meet the New York regulations. So in New York, if K-3, the requirement is daily, at least 120 minutes per week. 4-6, also 120 minutes per week, but that only needs to be 3 times per week. And then in grades 7 to 12, at least 3 periods a week in one semester, 2 periods a week in the other semester, for an average of 90 minutes per week. Recommendation though, national recommendation is 150 minutes for K-6 or 225 minutes in grades 7 to 12. Also recommended policy language that it has to be taught by a certified physical education teacher. Some districts are making up their minutes by having classroom teachers teach PE in their classroom, 10 minutes in the morning to meet that daily requirement. We want you to have stronger language than that, that it must be taught by the certified PE teacher, and that class must be held in the gym or outside, not in a classroom, and that recess cannot be substituted for physical education. Really important, we want training for physical education teachers that focuses on topics specifically for PE teachers. So you can see the sample language there. We want annual professional development, and again, specifically for physical education. When districts are doing sort of school-wide professional development days, sometimes it is on a topic that is just not relevant for PE, like reading comprehension strategies, right? Not relevant for PE, but sometimes PE teachers are made to go to that training anyway. Or if it is on a topic that's relevant to all staff, like social emotional learning, the presentation isn't geared or doesn't give examples about how that applies in physical education. PE is one of those classes that it looks different in PE than it does in math or art or even health class, right? So when bringing in speakers or trainers, make sure that they will provide examples and show how it's relevant for all content areas, not just the regular ones. And if it's a topic that is really not relevant for PE, allow your PE teachers to attend outside training on PD days or just meet themselves as a department, because many PE departments don't have a lot of time to meet and work through curriculum independently. So addresses physical education exemptions and substitutions. So best practice is that you will not allow exemptions, substitutions, or waivers for physical education. They're all slightly different. One refers to just not requiring someone to take PE at all. Say an example would be what's sometimes referred to as a super senior, where they want to take a lot of AP classes in their senior year. So they're not, and they don't have time to fit PE in. So you're just going to waive their requirement to take PE because other subjects are more important. A substitution or an exemption could be if you have a student that is a competitive dancer, for example, and they're dancing 6 days a week outside of school, that you're saying that they don't need to take PE, and that you're going to certify their dance studio as providing PE for them so that they don't need to take it during the school day. Another example is your athletic teams. In season, students don't need to take PE, or on game days, they don't need to participate in their PE class. We don't want anything to be substituted, waived, exempted for PE. It is one of the core subjects, so we need to make sure that it is mandated. In addition, I went through all of these. The last two I didn't talk about. PE grades should carry the same weight as other core subjects. And I know this happens. I don't know if it happens in any of your districts, but in years past, I've talked with PE teachers who have said that they've sometimes been asked to change an athlete's grade to make them eligible to play, or to change a student's grade to make them eligible to graduate. So we want to make sure that those practices are not happening, and that it's in your policy specifically that it's not allowed to happen. Before and after school physical activity for all students. This includes students with physical, cognitive, behavioral disabilities, developmental disabilities. Ideally, the policy language includes all students at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high. Many schools only have intramurals or this type of after-school program at the middle school and high school. If that's the case, put that in your policy, that it will just apply to middle school and high school, and in practice work to involve the elementary school as possible. PEPA 13, schools will provide at least 20 minutes of active daily recess. Recess PE or other physical activity will not be withheld from students for punishment or as punishment for behavior or instructional makeup time. So we want every student getting recess every day for at least 20 minutes. In my utopian world, I would want it twice a day for 20 minutes. But we want to make sure WPM 5, and this is really important, that is in your policy that recess cannot be withheld for any reason. I view recess as like a social skills class. You would never take social skills class away from a student with behavior issues, right? They're the ones that need it the most. So looking at how can we make sure that recess and other physical activity is not withheld from students? Part of that, in terms of implementation, is having each elementary school develop recess regulations so that there's an actual plan to making sure that all students are receiving quality recess. So you don't need to put the specifics of the plan into your policy, but you would put in your policy that each school will develop regulations and a plan. Some examples of what to put in that plan: prohibiting students from using technology as part of recess unless it is related to physical activity. So if they're watching Cosmic Kids and doing yoga, or doing Go Noodle as a whole class, if for some reason they're not able to get outside, then that would be okay. But far too often we see recess is students by themselves on their individual one-to-one device playing games and not getting up and moving or interacting with other students. We want recess to be scheduled midday. Part of the benefit of recess is it resets the brain and primes it for learning. So if recess is the last period of the day, you're losing a huge benefit of that recess. And those kids aren't getting the needed break during the day that they need. Same thing as if it's first thing in the morning. We want it midday. That shows and gives kids the most benefit. We recommend weather-related policies. So the idea is that students will go outside as long as it is 30 degrees or above, or whatever policy works for you. It is easy to bring kids out as long as they have the snow gear. Our grant can buy snow gear. So if that's the holdup to getting kids outside in the colder weather, talk with us, we can work through that. Training for teachers, I would say, is by far the number one thing that you can do to improve recess at your school. You have to explain to teachers what the rationale is for recess, alternatives to taking away recess for kids. Sarah and I can come in and do this for you, but that training is critical. And then provide recess kits. There's only one playground in a lot of schools, right? And if that playground is full of kids, kids need some other things to do. So if you provide recess kits, that gives them another option other than the playground. And then partner with your PE teachers. Your PE teachers are teaching lots of fun games to kids during PE class. Find out what those games are so that you can reinforce them during recess. Physical activity breaks during school. Recommended language, each school shall provide at least one physical activity break every 60 minutes of academic instruction daily. At middle school and high school, this can look a little bit different because we know most classes are not 60-minute periods, right? They're 42 minutes, 39 minutes. So make that apply to whatever your bell structure is at your school. Again, training is key here. Training will be provided for all teachers K through 12 on how to incorporate physical activity in the classroom. If you put that right into your policy, then you know that training will happen. Outdoor classrooms will be established. Active seating will be incorporated. These are all things that you can put in your policy in addition to implementing. Joint use agreements for physical activity. Many districts already have these, but the more specific you can be in your wellness policy, the better. So developing joint use agreements with community partners in order to expand physical activity opportunities for students and community members. And this can look like the fitness center will be open to school staff, family, and communities. Schools will partner with the community to offer wellness classes on school campus. Whatever practices you're currently doing, put it in your policy so we know it's sustainable. Active transportation, so safe routes to school. Each school shall partner with the local government, community-based agencies to support active transport to school. Many times the crossing guards, for example, are imperative if you're going to have a safe routes to school program. If you want kids walking and biking, you need crossing guards to allow them to do that safely. Sometimes crossing guards are volunteer police officers, retired police officers. Sometimes they're paid from the police. Sorry. But the other thing is partnering with the community, the town, the village, the government to create safe routes to school maps. Very often they have the software. They can map all of the streets in an entire neighborhood, and they can give each individual family the safest way for them to walk or bike to school. They can have those maps. And then ensuring that crosswalks and signage are well maintained. If there are areas where, say, a tree's blocking a stop sign, talk to the community, get that tree trimmed so that cars are stopping as they should. Provide bike racks, really important. And then again, partnering with your PE teachers to teach safe biking. All right, wellness promotion. Got about 2 minutes left, so we're gonna go quickly here. So we want to encourage our staff to model healthy eating and physical activity. We know that we can't mandate or prohibit staff from walking around with soda or sugary coffee drinks in the morning or eating donuts, but our hope is that as your school culture changes, that it will become easier and it will be the norm that staff aren't doing that because they are role models for your students. This is a really big one. Employee wellness. In every district we've talked to this year, employee wellness has risen to the top of issues that they want to address. So if you put in your policy that a wellness subcommittee will be formed, it's more likely to be addressed then. Some other examples could be that an annual interest assessment will be done. Schools will make effort to provide physical activity opportunities and healthy eating programs for staff, either through the district or through your insurance company, and that staff lounges will offer healthy food choices. Also, trainings and meetings more than 1 hour in length will offer physical activity breaks. So intentionally practicing with your staff what you want them to be doing with their students. And then also staff will be given information on preventative health, physical activity, and good nutrition throughout the year. We want physical activity to be seen as a good thing, not a negative. So we want it as a reward. So even at the high school level, kids want to get outside and play. So a fun Friday could be you're going to bring a bunch of lawn games out and they work really hard during the first 2 weeks of the unit. They've got an extra day, they're going to go outside and play. Elementary, they're going to get more recess. We want to also make sure that physical activity is not being used as punishment. This can be tricky, so you have to be very intentional about your language, because most of us wouldn't assume that during the school day, a student isn't being told to, run laps or drop and give me 20, right? But we know that our sports teams, very often this is happening. Kids are late to practice, they need to run. They show up late, they make bad decisions during a game, they need to do extra laps, extra sprints. So we don't want this happening ever. Changing that culture in athletics is, I don't think, something under the purview of the wellness committee, but we want to make sure that during the school day, physical activity is not being used as punishment. Federal regulation says that restricts marketing on school campus to only those foods that meet the Smart Snack standards. So this is not an inclusive list, but just some examples. So school property, equipment, you've got a Little Debbie snack cakes display thing in the school cafeteria, instructional materials, vending machines. As these items are replaced, they need to be replaced with items that don't include any marketing for unhealthy foods. This regulation also refers to any fundraising your district might be doing that does not meet Smart Snack standards. So if you're doing a springtime chocolate fundraiser, which I know a lot of districts do, that is okay. You're allowed to do that, but you can't advertise for that by putting up posters in the school, making announcements, reminding everyone about the chocolate fundraiser, because that is marketing unhealthy food. And then implementation, really quickly, and there should be a, oh, not this one. So recommendation is that you have building level committees as well as district. The regulation is you must have a district level policy. We recommend that you also add a building level committee as part of your actual policy, so we know that it will happen. Then the federal regulation also looks at reporting, assessments, and updating of your policy. So it is required that every 3 years you update your policy, you compare it to model policies, you make any changes that are needed. You also look at how well it's being implemented at the building level. You take all that information and you need to create a report that you share on your website and share with the public so that the public can see how well the district is implementing the federal regulations, as well as any best practices that you might have added in your policy. Also recommend that you create a very solid communication structure and that you post all of your meeting minutes to your school website so that families and the community can know what's happening in the district to promote wellness for students, staff, and families. And that is the end of my piece. And I know we're 2 minutes over. So I appreciate everyone staying the extra couple minutes. Does anyone have questions, concerns? I know we flew through that really quickly, and part of our role now will be meeting with your district wellness committees and going over your individual district policies and talking through a lot of these best practice and regulations to see what it will look like for your individual buildings and districts. So that'll be part of the process of this year. But what questions do you have at this point? Or
So Kate, if it's a matter of your district just isn't able to change the current policy, but it obviously has to be updated, do you change the wording to go along with what you have? I mean, obviously you always strive to be better and to meet not only the state, but the federal like mandates. Like, I don't know, what's the best? Because I think we talked about this briefly last time, is that many of us are fighting the lack of minutes and other obstacles that not only require more space, but more teachers and, so what's the best practice? How do we do that?
so if it's a federal regulation or state regulation like the PE minutes, don't change your policy to be weaker than federal or state regulations. Partly because, or mostly, because when your food service department gets audited, if your policy isn't up to date, you will get dinged and they will make you update your policy so that it reflects state and federal regulations. The other thing is that you can use that strong policy language as an advocacy tool. So when you go to the school board, when you talk with parent groups, even when you're talking, with your union, different things, you have to say, this is the federal regulation. The unfortunate part, as we've mentioned before, is that there's no real teeth at the state or federal level to actually enforce or implement any of it. So you've got to look at how can you build support from the bottom up if it isn't there from the top down. That's just the best, unfortunately. And as cultures shift, and maybe the culture is going to shift in your building around recess, that might lead to then a culture shift in the importance of PE. When teachers realize that their students are doing better after improving recess, they're going to realize they're going to do even better when you improve PE. So sometimes you work in one area to improve another one down the road. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much. We'll be sending out an evaluation. Please fill it out. It really helps us to know what additional support we need to prepare when we have those individual meetings with each of your districts about your policies. And I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.